Hello everyone. In our last video, we looked into a progression of sorts from, we'll call it third dimensional or old paradigm eating, which relies and depends heavily on a depletion replenishment process, in which your energy, nourishment, and sustenance for life comes from food and or drink, or in other words, calories. Calories input, calories output. To then graduating and not needing that kind of relationship with food any longer. Now, I want to make it clear, as I have already indicated, that Breatharianism doesn't mean you no longer eat or drink. It means you no longer need food or liquid in the same way. You're no longer a slave to it. In fact, you're no longer hungry in the same way. You no longer eat emotionally. You no longer get energy and nourishment only from food and every day from food, or multiple times a day, or because it's a certain time, that's your routine, that's your schedule, so you eat. You get to choose, because you're no longer even a slave to your belly. When and how much and what and how often to eat. So you've been set free from that other system and can then utilize it when you want to. It's true transcendence and inclusion. There are, however, many degrees of extreme that you can take this once you've graduated to the new system, changed your belief system, understand your energy system in a new way, and with practice have become accustomed to it and have developed an actual, real, organic relationship with your beliefs, food, nourishment, energy. Then the playing field is wide open for where and how far you want to take it. The primary point of this video that I want to make is that this process is highly individualized. And more, hopefully, over the years, the collective will wake up to this possibility, simply so that it's more easy to find yourself amongst other people experiencing the same thing. Doing these alternative lifestyles are not always supportive or supported by the collective. And it can be a lonely road to do it alone. So having a group, or at least one or two other people to check in with about it, who understand it, a community, a collective culture that supports it, is, if not necessary, at least helpful. However, within that, the experience, the process, the intuition, the guidance is highly individual. So once you've gotten the inclination to do this, and then once you've kind of gone through the initial initiation process, to have graduated from the third dimensional or old paradigm food system way of eating based on calories and depletion replenishment. Once you've learned how to resource energy more closely to the source through the practices that I listed: yoga, meditation, pranayama, sun gazing, connecting to the earth, yoga, meditation, pranayama, sun gazing, connecting to the earth, and light body activation. I actually would like to add one or two more to that, which you might not expect, and that is having fun. Doing something you enjoy, which is in and of itself nourishing and life-giving and energetic food. So once you've learned how to resource or harvest or utilize those tools for energy and nourishment, and it's more or less become a new groove in your body-mind system, then it's up to you and your relationship with it, your pure desire, not pathological desire, your pure desire, what you want, where you're headed, where you're being led by life itself, and your own unique navigatory compass for how extreme or casual or periodic or frequent or what specific way you want to do it. Do you want to continue in this intermediary period where you're still relying on these other practices and tools, saving a lot of money from not buying food, lost some weight, perhaps, reset some allergens, had an uplift or an elevation of consciousness and kind of always present high vibe energy rather than peaks and valleys, which comes from the old system. But again, as I said, when you're relying on those things, you are still subtly a slave to them. Even though, as I also said, I still love doing all of those practices. Just a part of who I am, the life that I love to live, and the hobbies that I love to do on a daily basis. The point is, I no longer need them in that kind of way. It's just refinement. You may then decide to move on and graduate in that way, to direct one-to-one communion with Source. It might not even be a decision or a choice you get to make. It might just happen, which is basically what has happened for me. Point of no return sort of thing. But here at the outset, there are a few principles or guidelines, suggestions that I'd like to offer for how to move in a different graduated progression from imbalance or pathology or poor conditioning or ego or fear-based choices or just habituated patterns that you mindlessly do and have always done without questioning it, to then balancing that out through certain systems of healing and transformation, which we'll talk about. And you could stay there, or again, you could graduate to having a direct one-to-one relationship with your intuitive guidance. So I'm simply correlating these two kind of schemes or progressions of graduation from old paradigm eating to resourcing energy in a new way through these practices to no longer needing that, just getting it straight from the source. Similarly, from pathology or imbalance or mindlessness or conditioning or habituation to balance, harmony, health, if you will, to then direct intuitive guidance, not relying on any other system to tell you what to do. There's a concept that I refer to often in the larger work that I teach. That if you've been working with me in that for some time, you will have heard me say, and you will have started to engage it a bit yourself. If this is brand new for you, then as long as you're working with me, get used to it, because it's super simple and yet not easy. And one of the most profound tools to really get you going in the right direction. Suffice it to say that also along the lines with the understanding of highly individualized and unique process in fasting and Breatharianism that has brought you to even be interested in it, and then will continue to take you along after you've learned it. There's also a highly individualized way in which you incarnationally manifest and live in a harmonious and balanced way. There are templates and archetypes and types, but within inside of that, it is highly individualized and customized. What's required there is that you learn to listen to your own true interior guidance. Unfortunately, in the spiritual world these days, there's a lot of talk about being your own guru, following the inner voice, being intuitively guided, without instruction or understanding around deconstructing all of the conditioned, pathological, shadowy, ego-based voices that are leading you here and there and everywhere and causing a lot of problems. So often, people who have not sufficiently done that will hear the invitation, do whatever feels good, or just listen to your intuition, and it kind of gets masked. The ego, in fact, masks itself as present moment living, or not needing or relying on other people and being my own master. That's really not a good idea until you've gone through your own weeding out and unwinding process to come into health and balance, and also to really get to know your own inner guidance. So this concept that I'm wanting to bring to your attention comes, at least in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It might show up elsewhere. But the Sanskrit word is Pratipaksha Bhavana. Pratipaksha Bhavana. And it means cultivation of the opposite. So if you consider, and this is an analogy that Christy loves to use, a freight train speeding down the tracks in reverse direction. But the freight train itself, or the conductor, or whoever's driving it, doesn't realize it's going in reverse direction. Suddenly, however, something happens where they're made aware that they're going in reverse. So, all attention, all effort, all strength, all at once gets poured into getting it going in the right direction. But before it can get going in the right direction, it's got to stop going in the wrong direction. So, an equal and opposite force has to be applied, equal and opposite. With the same force that it's going this way, has to be applied this way to get it to stop. Think about it. Consider the intensity, the going against the grain. We might even add a detail to the story that's like, the realization was, if we don't stop, we're going to go off a cliff. Or there's a break in the tracks going this way. And if we keep going, we'll be derailed. Something like that. So there's a sense of urgency. And you might have a sense of urgency which has brought you to want to do this. Either because of health reasons, or because food is just not interesting anymore. Or again, yes, you're spending too much money on food. But again, any of these lower level reasons, they're great gateways of inspiration. But if that's your only reason, that's kind of all you'll get back from it, and there might be karmic repercussions, as I talked about in the first video. Nonetheless, you have been guided here for some reason. You know that the freight train is possibly going in the wrong direction, and so a considerable amount of force, effort, commitment, dedication is going to be required to first stop the speeding freight train. Then after it's stopped, effort, force, and when I say force, I'm kind of saying it strictly in the physics world, like applying force to something. I don't mean forceful white-knuckled strain, no, because that in of itself will backfire on you. But then to get it going in the right direction also requires attention, dedication, commitment, effort, force. So I'd like for you to consider, and in the larger umbrella of the rest of the work that I teach, I would highly recommend that you dig into that a little bit alongside this material, this course, with that as well, if you haven't done so already, because it takes an overarching and very deep look into lots of different areas of pathology, imbalance, or going in the wrong direction for you. It's very important, as which one of the philosophers, Socrates or somebody, sorry if that's not the one, the cliche and popularized phrase, know thyself. means so many different things. Get to know the false version of yourself, the imbalanced version of yourself. Get to know your triggers, get to know the shadow, get to know the ego, so that you can reverse the direction. Get to know your true, balanced, healthy, harmonious self, which is a necessary prerequisite to then get to know that kind of ultimate self in communion with life, in communion with God, in communion with the hologram, and directly in touch with your unique, individualized compass. But for this course, specifically, whether you write it down, journal about it, or just think about it, I want you to actually look into at least a few things in regards to food, eating, the old paradigm, ingesting, digesting, depletion, replenishment, on any layer of your being. And I want to specifically go into more detail about the layers of your being that are called the koshas in Sanskrit in another video. But for now, suffice it to say, the kind of standard categories are physical, energetic, emotional, mental, spiritual. And there are implications in this progressive graduating scheme that I'm laying out for you in each of those layers. I may even say find at least one imbalance, disharmony, pathology, addiction, aversion, pattern, habit, conditioning from each of the layers, physical, energetic, emotional, mental, spiritual, that you know needs some Pratipaksha Bhavana or cultivation of the opposite to get that pattern stopping before we can then go in the right direction. And you already know what these things are. And it meets you right where you are. So actually, it's not just overeating, but that's usually the tendency. It could be undereating. Father Thomas Keating actually tells a story about when he first joined the monastery as a young teenager. Actually, I think he joined when he was 17. So it was in those first early years when he had this kind of arrogant spiritual ego, which is, of course, the most dangerous kind of ego, I think. Where, to him, it was approached competitively. He wanted to be the best meditator in the monastery. He wanted to sleep less than anybody in the monastery. He wanted to be the best faster in the monastery. And so, 1 year during Lent, which is the 40-day period right after Mardi Gras, right before Easter that I was talking about in the last video, a period of fasting, a period of letting go of something that you normally have in order to experience that clearing out or that emptying out so that it can be then filled by something else. So very often that is food, but it could be anything. So you could also extrapolate and connect all that I'm saying here really to anything. Fast from anything versus gluttony versus feasting. Feasting, fasting, gluttoning with anything. And you can try that practice. It's very profound and insightful. Even just for a period of time as an experiment. Christy also likes to say, if you even have a reaction, or if you even have a resistance to considering giving something up just for a few days or for a season of life, then that's the very thing you need to give up for a few days or a season of life. Because it's got a hold of you for some reason in some kind of way. So, the monks check in with the abbot, the leader of the monastery, once a week or however often they do. And Father Thomas was, as a young monk whippersnapper, bragging about his Lenten observance, of how little he was eating, how little he was sleeping, whatever else it was, how much he was praying. And the abbot picked up very quickly and keenly on the ego, disguised as spiritual practice. And instead of praising him, he actually said, your Lenten observance for the next 40 days is to eat a chocolate bar every day. And Father Thomas thought that was the worst idea on the planet, because it went against the locomotion of pathology and imbalance in his belief system. He thought he was doing something pious. He thought he was making God happy. When in actual fact, he was making a competition out of what should never be a competition, out of true transformative practices. So the Pratipaksha Bhavana prescription every time will feel like the worst possible idea. So check this out. Fasting doesn't necessarily mean not eating. For most, it probably will. Now, Breatharianism, I've already described and explained what that is. Graduating from the need of these things for nourishment. But if you skip to that without rebalancing an appropriate relationship with food, nourishment, metabolizing energy, then it will come back to bite you. There will be karmic repercussions. So this is not just about not eating. This is about reestablishing a right relationship with all things. And suffice it to say that at the beginning, when you're just starting out on this journey, not just with Breatharianism, but with self-awareness, knowing thyself, most everything that you do, if not fully, is at least partly tainted by poor conditioning, habituation, addiction, aversion, shadow, ego, projection. And again, I would highly recommend you work with me and the other stuff that I teach so that we can go even more deeply into that in an all-around, well-rounded way, not just for food. So, the prescription from the abbot for Father Thomas was to fast from pathological fasting. Now again, for most of us in this world, because of our gluttonous nature, filling up, shoving it down, collecting things, will be to do without. Let go of things, give away some things, eat less social media, less all around, because we're in such a more driven culture. But for some, if you're really honest, if you have a subpersonality, a spiritual ego that has an achievement mindset or thinks you're getting a gold star or a pat on the back for doing this, and you're overdoing it, that again is unhealthy and will have consequences. In addition, if you do have perhaps body image issues that have manifested as eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, there are some teachers of fasting and Breatharianism that say, if you have an eating disorder, you can't do this. It's just going to make it worse. But that is a universal or an assumed universal objective belief that, as we've already seen in the conversation about beliefs, is just not universally true. It's true if you have an eating disorder or body image issue, Breatharianism will make it worse. That is true if you're not doing the middle piece of balancing and harmonizing and Pratipaksha Bhavaning the freight train. So eventually, yes, the goal of this is to graduate from fasting to Breatharianism. Just like possibly the goal on the other progression was from old paradigm eating to new paradigm eating, metabolizing of energy, to not needing any of that. Similarly, from pathology and imbalance to balance and harmony and health, to then direct intuitive guidance. Moment to moment to moment. For what to eat, how much to eat, when to eat. What of these practices to utilize or not. But for a while, discipline is actually very necessary. Knowing thyself and disciplining thyself. And we don't like the word discipline, understandably so, because it reminds us of childhood, it reminds us of being punished, it reminds us of maybe you were a ballerina or in the dance world where discipline was an abusive tool, or even in the athletic world very often it's an abusive tool and it brings up bad memories, or from church or religion, where discipline was seen as this white-knuckled, contracted attempt to make something happen. Which, again, as we saw in the first video regarding trying to manifest something from the wrong place, backfires. Know thyself, discipline thyself. Don't get confused thinking that disciplining thyself is just a white-knuckled process and exercise of refraining from eating. That's not what this course is even about. The discipline is in and of itself highly unique and customized based on knowing thyself. So before we can even graduate to Breatharianism or to your own navigation compass, where you're in touch with your own intuitive guidance, you must get to know your pathology. And I'd like for you to now, or after the video, as homework, and actually, write it down. I just decided. Write it down or journal about it. At least one pathology, imbalance, ego, poor conditioning, addiction, aversion, regarding food, eating, in the old paradigm, digesting, body image, etc. At least one physically, energetically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And if there's another one that comes that doesn't exactly fit into those categories, but you could find where anything will fit into those categories if you really kind of expand and think about it, then feel free. So, for example, the midnight snack that you have every night that is pleasureful because it's your routine, and maybe because it's masking something you don't want to be with and look at, filling a void of loneliness or sadness or who knows what else. So it's pleasureful for that reason, but it's also painful and imbued with a drop of suffering because it's covering up that thing, and that thing's not going away just because you have the midnight snack. Still nagging there. But also, more than that, it causes suffering at the idea of not having it, or the manipulations or the time wasted that you do in order to get it, or the fear of not having it. It's just an example. then I'd like for you to devise a Pratipaksha Bhavana plan to cultivate the opposite. It could be either don't have that midnight snack at all, or change to a healthier choice. Either one. The other example could be body image. Maybe you wear clothes that make you look skinny. Or maybe you suck in your gut so that your belly doesn't protrude. Or maybe you look at yourself degradingly or ashamedly in the mirror. That's kind of a physical one, but that's also very much because the physical is like the action that you're doing. But also see how the nexus knot root system connects throughout all of the layers. So that's an emotional thing. That's a mental thing. Probably not necessarily spiritual, but mental, emotional. The stories you tell yourself when you look at yourself in the mirror. So subtle, but stop it in its tracks. Stop and look at yourself in the mirror. And see what kind of commentary is happening. Or what kind of feelings or belief you have around that. And then, again, devise a plan, Pratipaksha Bhavana, to start moving in the other direction. Cultivating the opposite. So, let your belly protrude. Or don't look at yourself in the mirror when you normally do if it's from a vanity perspective. Or don't do your makeup in that certain way. Listen, eventually you will graduate from even this. So remember the chocolate bar analogy with Father Thomas. It felt like the worst thing in the world to do, but he tells that story. Rest his soul, now he's died. But I've heard him tell that story because it was one of the most impactful and meaningful practices that he had ever done. And it taught him so much about himself and about real discipline. So the discipline even of eating a chocolate bar, which for most would be the pathology, for him was the medicine. The discipline to do that and to be with all of the feelings that he was doing something wrong or making God mad. He then later, from the healthy, mature, rebalanced, harmonious self place, said that he came to the conclusion, now this is for him, not universal. This is for that specific pattern. That he realized that when he puts his hand in the cookie jar, and this is literal and it could mean lots of things, that instead of God frowning at him, scolding him, God now says, why don't you have another one? Have 2 cookies. Now, for some of you who have a pathology based on cookies or whatever cookie means, that will be like, oh yeah, God, abundance, wants me to enjoy life, so I'm just nom 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 nom. But that's not true enjoyment, and you know that. You've just been using God, unfortunately, using free will or using present moment or your otherwise understanding of oneness without bringing all the other parts and pieces along with you as an excuse to do something you know you shouldn't. So, that was specific for him. But in any case, the discipline to go against the grain of that pathology. Again, I promise you, eventually, you'll graduate from that. Well, I don't promise you that you will eventually graduate. I promise you that if you do eventually graduate from that, once you get the ship course corrected, once you get the train stopped and going in the right direction, it's not all about discipline. It's not all about always doing the opposite. It's very much more in the flow. That's another one, actually. If flow is an imbalance or is supporting an imbalance in the name of, oh, I'm just in the present moment, but it's actually fear of commitment or irresponsibility or something like that, then Pratipaksha Bhavana prescription, the good medicine, the chocolate bar, to use that analogy, would be structure. Routine. Again, not so that it causes white-knuckled guilt and rigidity, but so that you can balance out the pathology of irresponsibility and carelessness. Eventually, you have a right relationship with both structure and flow, and that can be utilized in a transcend and include kind of way in present moment guidance with your compass. So, devise a plan for Pratipaksha Bhavana practice for each one of those pathological layers. And then when you do it, or don't do it, whatever you're fasting from, if you're fasting from feasting or fasting from fasting, fasting from feasting or fasting from fasting, it's going to feel horrible at first. So I want you to find a way to be with what's coming up in that regard. Also, as it relates with food, if you know, as an example, eating 3 times a day is too much and is coming from a place of stuffing yourself or boredom, then maybe the Pratipaksha Bhavana is eating only 2 meals a day. Or if you're already kind of starving yourself for a body image issue or some kind of imbalance or super spiritual ego that you have, then eating an extra meal or eating an extra dessert. Or if you're only liking your body when it looks a certain way in the mirror, then the practice could be stand in the mirror and look at yourself with your belly protruding, naked, or whatever it is, without makeup on, without all the clothing, all the colors. Or again, the opposite could be, don't look at yourself in the mirror. Turn all of your mirrors around, whichever one seems appropriate. Again, highly, 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 highly customized. Comes from being honest, knowing thyself, and being disciplined to go in the other direction. So when you're in the moment of that Pratipaksha Bhavana, doing the practice that you've devised for yourself, or not doing what you would normally be doing because it's pathological, then I'd like for you to journal, write down. Doesn't have to be in the moment. Like in the moment, maybe you choose to do something else, go on a walk, and that's difficult to journal while you're walking. But journal at some point about what came up during that process. The feelings of guilt or shame or anxiety, or what strong urges were there to go back to your old habit. Notice also if it's starting to cause strain or reaction. If it's deeply embedded, then you take it one step at a time. Write down what's coming up for me physically, what's coming up emotionally, what's coming up mentally, energetically, spiritually. So here's the pathology on each of the 5 koshas. Here's the Pratipaksha Bhavana on each of the 5 koshas. And then here's what comes up on each of the 5 koshas. You can get as detailed and complex with it as you want. Deep down, and eventually, this bitter medicine is and becomes sweet nectar. You know it's good for you. And that discipline eventually is very easy. It becomes natural. And then eventually, possibly, once you graduate from that, it's simple, effortless flow. Being guided moment to moment to moment. Fun, huh? And you thought this was just about not eating. We gotta balance it out first. It's really about freedom. It's really about elevation of consciousness and healing. Just specifically using food and specifically using the layer of energy, metabolism, and nourishment for sustenance of life. We could do this in many different ways. But there are these necessary prerequisites which will keep you safe, will keep you sane, and will ensure that everybody can do this, including people with body image issues and food illnesses, eating disorders. Whereas otherwise, they say those people can't do it because it'll just make it worse. It's just like the folks that in the 12-step meetings, which I deeply respect, once an addict, always an addict. Okay, well, if you say you are, then you are. But if you say you're not, when you still are, that's dishonest as well. There is true healing. I can speak from experience. I had a strong addiction pattern back in the day that is healed. I am no longer an addict. Pretty amazing. So making better choices with food. If you're kind of in the gluttonous category already, or mindless eating, whatever your excuse is around that, eating organic, eating less. And for other videos down the road, I will give you specific suggestions. We'll talk about what to eat when you eat before you've come to the direct intuitive guidance. But while you're in the discipline category, and right now, just video number 2, you've not yet been given the green light or the initiation from me with these other practices or into the full-on Breatharianism. So now we're talking fasting. Remember in the invite intro video, I made a distinction between fasting and Breatharianism. That's where we're at right now. Asking you to know yourself, to discipline yourself, to rebalance yourself, to understand fasting, fasting from feasting or fasting from fasting. So soon, we'll be talking about suggestions for what to eat when you eat before it's direct in-the-moment guidance. And we'll, of course, talk about that, how to look for that, how to tune into that, what that looks like. And also, suggestions for what to do when you're not eating. What to do when you're not doing what you normally do pathologically. So look forward to all of that. I'm very excited to be on this journey with you. I'm very motivated, as you can see, to guide you along. I'm getting more and more inspirations and ideas as each day and each video unfolds. And you are, again, I'll say, in for one of the most profound experiences of your life. One more reminder, you can take it however you want. Once you get through this course, once you're initiated, once you understand it, maybe it's just a once a year thing. Maybe it's a lifestyle thing. But regardless, freedom, especially now in this world, freedom is a high commodity. Namaste.